Controlling pixels to blend colors in Photoshop. Blending layers. So we have our blending modes, which affects how a layer's pixels blend with the pixels in the layer that's directly below it. And there are a couple different ways that we can choose a blending mode. Number one, by having my layer be active, I can first of all go to my layers panel and choose a blending mode with the pop-up menu. So here you can see all of the various blending modes that I have available. I can click on one. If I wanted to toggle up and down, I can use the plus or minus key along with my shift key to see how this will blend. So now I'm looking at how my floral layer blends with my background layer, and I'm just toggling through the blending mode. So I'm holding down the shift key and I'm using the plus key to go down and the minus key to go back up. The third way that I can choose a blending mode is actually by double clicking on the layer itself. And we'll get the layer style dialog box to pop up. In the very first setting, blending options, the general blending blend mode. So this is the blend mode that I have going right now. And so I can choose that. I also have my opacity, which directly relates to the opacity here in my layers panel. So this information is the same as you see in the layers panel. The last way that I can choose a blending mode is actually under the layer menu. Up at the top, layer, and choose layer style. And again, we have all of our blending modes right here. So a few different ways that we can choose a blending mode in Photoshop. Blending pixels. We can control the colors of the image by blending pixels on one layer with the pixels on another layer. This is different than the blending modes. We can control actually which pixels are blended with pixels from the lower layers on this layers panel. For example, if I set the blend if color in this case with this layer to red, then all the pixels on the layer that are red will be blended based on the new settings. So how do we access this? It's in that layer style dialog box. So I'm going to go ahead and get to that layer style dialog box by double clicking on my layer panel here on the layer. I can also get to it by going under my layer menu and choosing the blending options under layer style, blending options. So probably the fastest is just to double click. So here's my dialog box, and I have all different types of styles that I can apply to my layers, but what I want to look at for this specific topic is just the blending options. So you want to make sure your very top option here is selected. So we have our general blending. Again, this is the blending mode and the opacity of the layer. We're going to look at advanced blending. So at the bottom here, I see different color channels that are available. So I have red, green, and blue. I also have some channels here as far as the red, the green, and the blue. And if I slide this just over a little bit, you can see by just turning off the red how now this has mixed with the pixels that are below it. If I turn off the green, you can see that just the blue now is going through. Let's do this with just the red. So you get some really interesting effects just by the advanced blending right here, just by turning those layers on or those layers off. Now, the bottom part here, this is for the color channels, and depending on what color mode I'm in, I'm going to see different channels. So, of course, my channels here as well. Because my document is RGB, the additive color model, I'm going to see red, green, and blue channels. If I was in CMYK or HSB, I would see different color channels. So the blend if here. Blend if, this determines the color range for the pixels that I want to blend. This layer, this specifies the range of pixels that will be blended on this active layer. So think of this layer as this active layer. The underlying layers are the lower visible layers to specify the range of pixels that will be blended on those lower visible layers. So in this case, I only have one lower layer. Let's take a look at how this works. If I choose to leave this at gray, What I'm going to do with this layer option is drag the left slider, which are the darker values, to the right. And as I do that, you'll see that the darkmost values start blending. And eventually, as part of my flower goes, because those are the darkest values. We're talking grayscale here. If I go the other direction, you're going to see some of the lighter areas start going. Okay? If I go from below here, so the underlying layer, again, because it's a keyboard, I've got black and I've got white. If I take the underlying layer, and if I just click even 1 to get the slider to move to 1 or 2, you can already see how the black now is coming up through the top. And as I go more, you can get pretty much all those darker values in there. Now if I go the other direction, it's going to take the white and blend it on up so I can get all of that white amount here selected. So this is dealing with the bottom layer, and this layer deals with the top layer. If I change my blend if to a different color, let's say I change it to red. So now here, my blend this layer, the red will disappear right away. If I change the darker areas here, my red will stay, and it's the darker areas. So in the underlining, there are no reds. So you can see it just takes the lighter value and it takes the darker value. So if you can color specify what kind of pixels are on the layer, you're going to get different results. So these color channels, again, dependent on the color mode and how the pixels are blended together. Here's another example that I can show you the blending pixels. Again, I'm going to double click to get my layer style dialog box here. I'll slide this off to the side so it's not as much in the way. Now in this case, I have a floral layer and I have a layer that has a mailbox, pretty dark colors. Because the mailbox is on a white background, blending it will be very easy. If I take the bottom and I just move the white, you can see how those light colors are coming through right away. If I go the other direction, my black is going to come through of the mailbox. Now how about the top layer? If I take the lighter colors, just the lighter colors in the floral arrangements are going to go. Same with the bottom. So it depends on what kind of pixel combination you're dealing with will determine how this is going to change. Now I'm going to go to each of these channels because I don't necessarily have pure red here, but you can see the oranges go with this one. If I do the green, obviously the green and some of that yellow will go. And if I do the blue, the purples and a little bit of the oranges. So where I have those colors of hue will just be determined there. So in this case, I think the best would be to take the underlying layer and move it over. Using the color sliders in a little bit more detail. So when adjusting this layer and underlining sliders, we can do certain things. I'm going to go ahead and double click once again to get to my layer styles. Now we're talking about this layer and the underlying layers. Colors that are outside of the pixel range set here will not be visible. So if I take my color slider for this layer and I change it to red and I move it, you can see that those colors then are not visible. If I go the other direction, you can see that my background is starting to go away. So what's happening is at this point right here, that boundary between the visible and the invisible is sharp and it's hard. Notice right here, we've got just, it's either on or it's off as far as the pixels go. So what we can do is split the slider for a range span, which creates a span of pixels for the visible boundary. So to do that, we take the slider here. You can see that there's a double arrow, and I hold down on my Alt or my Option key and I can split it, and you see how it sort of gradually transitions now. So it softens that boundary by creating a gradual transition between the visible and the invisible. So invisible here, the visible is over here, and this point between my split range, my split sliders, is a gradual transition. So this works really nice in the fact that I can do some really interesting things and not have that stark contrast. And I can do that on both sides. You can see how it gradually is fading away. So depending on the effect that you're trying to achieve, remember that this is a really nice way to blend those pixels.